Iran deployed a secret weapon against USS Abraham Lincoln. What happened next was a merciless response at sea.
At 0347 on a Thursday morning in the Strait of Hormuz, Petty Officer Second Class Marcus Reeve, seated at Sonar Station 3 aboard the destroyer USS Bulkley, watches a thin gray line crawl across his waterfall display at a bearing of 047 and a range that the automated classifier has refused to commit to for the last hour and 41 minutes. The contact is moving at a constant 4.2 knots. It has been moving at a constant 4.2 knots since he came on watch. It has not turned, it has not slowed, it has not drifted. The computer has labeled it biologic, confidence 71%, and Reeve has been arguing with the computer in his head for most of his shift. The Bulkley is screening the USS Abraham Lincoln, CVN-72, 11 nautical miles ahead through a dark sea, and somewhere in Islamabad, an Iranian diplomat is at this moment handing a folded sheet of paper to a Pakistani intermediary that contains the outline of a ceasefire proposal. Both things are true. Only one of them is the truth. The thing on Reeve's screen costs Iran somewhere between $4 and $6 million to build. It is a Fateh-class autonomous underwater vehicle, 11 meters long, lithium iron phosphate battery powered, displacing roughly 9 tons, carrying a shaped charge of approximately 480 kilograms of high explosive in a forward conical warhead designed to channel its detonation upward against a hull. It does not emit. It does not ping. It does not transmit. It was launched 72 hours ago from a fishing pier near Bandar Abbas with a flash drive of GPS coordinates loaded into its guidance bay. And from the moment its propeller began turning, it has done exactly one thing: travel in a perfectly straight line at exactly 4.2 knots toward a moving point in the sea, where a calculation made 3 days ago said the USS Abraham Lincoln would be. The calculation was correct. The line is closing. And on every American display from here to Bahrain, it is registering as a confused whale. In sick aboard the Bulkley, the procedure is established. The engagement geometry is familiar. The watchstanders have run drills against Iranian fast attack craft, against Houthi anti-ship cruise missiles, against Shahed 136 drones launched in swarms of 24. 2 SH-60R Seahawks are spotted on deck across the strike group with their dipping sonars armed. 2 Mark 54 lightweight torpedoes hang from each helicopter's pylons. The carrier is steaming at 22 knots on a base course of 285. The combat air patrol is rotating overhead. The Aegis ships are tracking 117 surface contacts and 43 air contacts and have classified all of them. Everyone in the strike group is doing what they have trained for, and they are not yet afraid. Below the surface, the Fateh does nothing that would help them. It maintains depth at 84 meters. Its single thermal managed electric motor turns at the same RPM it has turned at for 3 days. Its onboard computer is running a guidance loop that updates twice per minute and a passive hydrophone array that listens for the unmistakable acoustic signature of a Nimitz-class carrier. It has heard the Lincoln for 19 hours. It is steering toward her on a constant bearing decreasing range solution that has not varied by more than 0.3 degrees since Tuesday. It is patient. It is the kind of weapon that does not exist in any naval warfare doctrine the United States has written, because the United States has never built one, because the United States has never needed to. Reeve calls his supervisor at 0354. Chief Holloway puts on the spare headset and listens for 90 seconds, and then says the thing Reeve has been waiting to hear: "That's not a whale." The contact gets a new track number, M2241, and a new classification, possible low confidence. The word possible does a great deal of work in that label. It is the word that allows a chain of command to move slowly. It is the word that, at 0359, results in a routine prosecution call to the carrier strike group's anti-submarine warfare commander aboard the cruiser USS Late Gulf, who acknowledges and tasks 1 SH-60R, call sign Magnum 612, to lift and prosecute. Magnum 612 launches at 0414. The contact is now 9.1 nautical miles from the Lincoln and closing at 4.2 knots, which gives the carrier 2 hours and 11 minutes before the Fateh is inside its detonation envelope. Nobody in SIC is alarmed. The procedure is established. They have done this before. They have not done this before. Lieutenant Commander Elena Vasquez has been the strike group's senior acoustic intelligence officer since the deployment began in February, and she has been watching the Bulkley's raw narrowband data on a repeater in the Lincoln's sick compartment with a focus that has nothing to do with the surface picture. Her master's thesis at the Naval Postgraduate School, completed in 2019, was titled Spectral Signatures of Low Observable Autonomous Underwater Platforms, Detection Methodologies Against Constant Bearing Threats. It was classified at the secret level on the day she defended it. She has read it 4 times in the last 6 weeks. She has been looking, without telling anyone she was looking, for exactly the kind of contact that is now crawling across the screen in front of her. At 0421, she leaves Civic without finishing her coffee and walks the 4 ladders down to flag plot and asks to speak to the strike group commander. What she shows him takes 90 seconds. The contact's spectral signature, isolated and cleaned of background biologic noise, contains a 142 Hz line and a 287 Hz line that are mathematically related as a fundamental and its second harmonic, consistent with a brushless DC electric motor turning at 8,520 RPM. No whale has a brushless DC motor. No whale travels in a straight line for 19 hours. No whale ignores the deep scattering layer. This is not a submarine. This is not a torpedo. This is something else entirely, and it has been inside the strike group's screen since before the strike group entered the strait. The admiral asks her what she thinks it is. Visquez says, a one-way underwater drone. Autonomous, pre-programmed, terminal phase. He asks her how she knows. She says, because I wrote a paper about how you would build one, and somebody read it before I did. At 0438, the prosecution becomes a kill prosecution. Magnum 612 drops its dipping sonar at a calculated intercept point 2,200 yards ahead of the contact's track. The Fatah is now 7.4 nautical miles from the Lincoln. The helicopter's AX-22 sonar transmits a single active ping at high power. The return is faint, fragmented, almost lost in the bottom reverb. The Fatah's hull is coated in a 14mm anechoic rubber layer that absorbs roughly 78% of incident acoustic energy. The pilot asks for a second ping. The second ping returns a marginal contact at the predicted bearing. Magnum 612 releases a Mark 54 torpedo at 0441. The torpedo enters the water and accelerates to 40 knots and begins its search pattern. The Fatah's onboard computer detects the torpedo's seeker emissions at 0441 and 38 seconds. Its evasive logic, programmed by an engineer in Tehran who had also read papers on American lightweight torpedo seeker behavior, executes a preloaded routine, cut motor power to 0, deploy 2 acoustic decoys, descend at maximum negative pitch to 140 meters, and turn 47 degrees to starboard. The decoys, small expendable canisters that emit broadband noise centered on 8 kHz, drift in the Fatah's old track. The Mark 54 prosecutes the decoys for 46 seconds, runs through them, reacquires nothing in the cold layer below 120 meters, and at 0443 and 22 seconds enters terminal search with no target. It exhausts its fuel at 0446. It sinks. The Fatah restarts its motor at 0447 and resumes its base course at 4.2 knots. It is now 6.1 nautical miles from the Lincoln. The carrier's evasive maneuvering, ordered at 0440 and executed as a hard turn to course 015 at 28 knots, has bought 11 additional minutes. The Fatah's guidance loop recalculates. The line bends. It is still closing. In flag plot, the admiral is told that the only torpedo in the water has missed. There are 3 more lightweight torpedoes in the strike group's airborne assets and 4 on deck. There is no second helicopter in position. The Fatah is too quiet for the carrier's own CQQ-89 hull-mounted sonar to detect at this range and too deep for the towed array to localize precisely. The math is not survivable through conventional means. At 4.2 knots, the Fatah will reach a 500-meter detonation standoff in 53 minutes. A 480-kilogram shaped charge detonated at 84 meters depth and 500 meters lateral from a Nimitz-class hull will, according to the analysis Visquez did not have to do because somebody at NAVSEA had already done it in 2017, produce a bubble pulse and a surface cavitation jet capable of opening a 14-meter longitudinal crack in the carrier's outer hull below the waterline and inducing a whip response in the keel of sufficient amplitude to compromise the shaft alignment of the number 2 and number 3 main reduction gears. The Lincoln would not sink. The Lincoln would not fight again on this deployment, or the next, or possibly the one after that. The plan, written 3 years ago in a building in Tehran nobody in this room has ever heard of, had been perfect. Vizquez is already talking. She has spent the last 6 weeks running, in her spare time, a passive narrowband collection on every unidentified low-frequency contact the strike group's towed arrays have logged in the Gulf of Oman and the Strait. She has built, without authorization and without telling anyone, a refined acoustic fingerprint of a specific 142 Hz motor signature, sampled across 19 hours and corrected for Doppler and for the Strait's thermocline. She did not build it because she expected this. She built it because she was a person who, when she could not sleep, looked at data. She tells the Admiral that the second SH-60R, Magnum 614, currently airborne on a routine surface, search a job that had found nothing in weeks, can be vectored to a dip point 800 yards ahead of the Fatah's reconstructed post-evasion track, and that its dipping sonar can be loaded with her narrowband template, and that a Mark 54 can be programmed to home on the 142 Hz line directly, bypassing its broadband seeker entirely. This has never been attempted operationally in the history of naval warfare. The Mark 54's software supports it. Nobody has ever used the feature in combat because nobody has ever had a target whose motor signature was known to 4 decimal places. The Admiral asks her how long she needs to push the template to Magnum 644. Vizquez says, 90 seconds. He says, do it. She did not wait for orders. There was no time to wait for orders. The template is already queued on her workstation. She pushes it at 0501. Magnum 614 receives it at 0501 and 14 seconds, loads it into the torpedo's pre-launch parameters at 0502, repositions to the new dip point at 0506, and lowers its sonar dome to 95 meters at 0508. The Fatah is now 4.7 nautical miles from the Lincoln and 1,400 yards from the dip point. At 0509 and 11 seconds, Magnum 644's sonar operator, aviation warfare specialist First Class Devon Park, sees the 142 Hz line walk into his narrowband display at the bearing Vizquez predicted, within 0.4 degrees, at the depth Vizquez predicted, within 6 meters. He calls the contact with the particular clarity that comes from seeing a thing you cannot unsee. The torpedo drops at 0509 and 38 seconds. The Mark 54 accelerates. 40 knots. The seeker is silent in broadband. The seeker is alive in narrowband. It is listening for one specific harmonic pair, and that harmonic pair is 380 meters away and getting closer at a combined closure of 44.2 knots. The Fatah's onboard computer detects no seeker emissions. There are no seeker emissions. The decoys are not deployed. There is nothing to deploy them against. The Fatah continues on its base course at 4.2 knots toward the carrier it has been traveling toward for 3 days. The torpedo arrives. The torpedo passes within 4 meters of the Fatah's hull at 0510 and 47 seconds, and its proximity fuse triggers a 45-kilogram PBXN-103 warhead. The detonation occurs at a depth of 86 meters, 220 meters from the starboard quarter of the USS Abraham Lincoln. The Fatah's own 480-kilogram warhead sympathetically detonates 0.045 seconds later. The combined energy release is on the order of 2.1 gigajoules. A bubble pulse, 38 meters in radius, forms, collapses, reforms, and collapses again. 17 overlapping acoustic events register on the Lincoln's hull array in 2.3 seconds. A column of water rises 70 meters off the carrier's starboard side. Plates buckle along a 22-meter section of the outer hull between frames 184 and 210. The number 3 shaft develops a 0.8 millimeter misalignment that will require dry dock repair in Bahrain. 14 sailors are knocked off their feet. None are killed. The Lincoln does not lose propulsion. The Lincoln does not lose flight operations. At 0512, an FA-18F that had been on final approach catches the 3-wire and rolls out clean. In a low concrete building near Bandar Abbas, an Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps captain named Reza Ardakhani, who has been the program officer for the Fatah project since 2021, and who launched the unit personally on Monday afternoon, understood what had happened before his crew did. The acoustic telemetry that the Fatah was supposed to transmit on detonation, a single coded burst confirming target destruction, did not arrive. What arrived instead, on the open hydrophone net Iran maintained along the Strait's southern coast, was a detonation signature that was 28% too small and 41 seconds too early. He sat down at his console and did the arithmetic. The drone had been intercepted. They had spent 3 years developing a weapon designed to defeat every American countermeasure that existed. They had spent 72 hours steering it toward a carrier that did not know it was coming. They had needed 9 more minutes. They were not going to get 9 more minutes. He picked up the phone to call Tehran, and the line was already ringing because Tehran was calling him. The phone call did not last. At 0547, 4 B-2 Spirits that had been holding at a tanker track over the central Arabian Peninsula since 0200, in an orbit that the Iranian Air Defense Network had logged as routine and dismissed as routine, released a total of 16 Jibu-57AB massive ordnance penetrators on 3 target sets: the Fatah Assembly Facility at Bandar Abbas, the program's testing pier at Jask, and a hardened command bunker 14 kilometers inland that housed the program's engineering staff. The strike took 11 minutes from first weapon release to last weapon impact. The program ended in those 11 minutes. Captain Ardakani's phone call ended in the third of those minutes. In Islamabad, the Pakistani intermediary was still holding the folded sheet of paper. Lieutenant Commander Visquez filed her engagement report at 1840 that evening, in the clinical prose the form required. Track M2241 was classified as Iranian Autonomous Underwater Vehicle, Fatah class, prosecuted by Magnum 614 at 0510 local using a narrowband cued Mark 54 employing a target-specific acoustic template generated from passive collection over the preceding 19 hours. Detonation occurred at 220 meters from CVN 72. Carrier sustained moderate hull damage, no loss of mission capability. Recommend immediate fleet-wide adoption of narrowband-cued lightweight torpedo employment doctrine against low observable autonomous undersea threats. At the bottom of the report, in the comments block, she wrote one sentence in her own words, and the strike group commander forwarded the report to 5th Fleet without changing a word. Iran spent 3 years building a weapon we could not hear. We spent 19 hours learning its voice, and 11 minutes answering it. By 0600, the sea east of the Lincoln was flat again. The water column had closed. The fires at Bandar Abbas were 300 miles away and not visible from the flight deck. The carrier turned back into the wind at 22 knots and recovered the last of the morning's combat air patrol. Petty Officer Reeve, relieved at 0800, walked to the mess and ate eggs and did not yet know the name of the officer who had used his contact. Magnum 614 was on deck being refueled. The strait was quiet. The diplomatic cable from Islamabad arrived in Washington at 0823 local and was read and filed. Somewhere below 80 meters, fragments of a Fatah-class autonomous underwater vehicle drifted down through the cold layer toward a bottom they would never quite reach, and the Strait of Hormuz closed over them in silence, as if the whole thing had never happened at all.